Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Whatever time it is that you're watching this video, thank you once again for clicking on the PenBoyRoy Fountain Pen Review channel. The subject of today's video, the Conklin Empire Fountain Pen. The Conklin brand was established in the year 1898 by a man bearing the greatest name in the history of all things kinda okay, and his name was Roy Conklin. This man was responsible for the world's first fountain pen that wasn't a pen you had to dip into a bottle of ink, as it was the first fountain pen that held ink inside the body of the pen. Roy Conklin was the Steve Jobs of his time, having innovated fountain pens in ways never before seen, with patented filling mechanisms such as the crescent filler and filling systems not using sacks. He was, for sure, a pioneer in the infection of the fountain pen virus. That is, until the insidious invasion of the ballpoint pen in the 1950s, which no doubt contributed to the end of Conklin production in 1955. Although that statement is circumstantial, I do like blaming the ballpoint pen anyway. The Conklin brand was later revived by Rob Rosenberg in the year 2000. In the year 2009, the brand was then acquired by the Jaffa Corporation, owners of Monteverde. They are also the official US distributors of brands such as Stipula, Pinnator, Online, as well as many others, including their most recent brand, Diplomat. This year, 2018, the Conklin brand released a fountain pen of a new design, the Conklin Empire. It is a pen that pays homage to 20th century skyscrapers, as well as Art Deco design, which was a design that started in the 1920s and by the 1930s became a saturated style in both Western Europe and the United States, expressing modernism reflected in fashion. The Empire, despite being a new design, retains a vintage look and therefore continues the commitment of keeping the designs of Conklin looking vintage. This pen was sent to me for review by Goulet pens, so thank you Brian, Rachel, and Margaret. That's all I have for the background information. Moving on to the neutral zone. Those elements about the pen that are neither good or bad, or can be good or bad, depending on you. Our nib here is a Goulet exclusive box stainless steel No. 6 nib, branded with the logo of a buck, which is actually what the word Bock, shown engraved under the buck, translates to in German. The feed is a standard feed found in pens that utilize Bock nibs, such as the Keras Custom Ink. The nib and feed are part of an unscrewable nib unit utilizing the standard housing found on other Conklin and Monteverde brand pens. The nib unit is equipped with a magnetic collar, much like the one found on the Conklin Nozac, as well as an O-ring. The nib unit unscrews into the middle grip section that has a slight taper to a moderate flare and step that has a diameter greater than that of the magnetic collar, giving the collar, grip, and nib housing a step design. This step design is actually a design used by other pen brands to reflect the development and achievement of modern architectural designs. There's another O-ring just before the grip threads, with the grip threads being unified with the grip section. These threads screw into the metal thread assembly of the body. The body thread assembly sits inside this chimney that has these 4 ridges spaced around it. These ridges fit into receiving ridges on the inside of the cap, causing the cap to seat and lock in place, much in the same way we saw with the Visconti Vertigo. The rest of the body tapers with this pattern here, which resembles a mooring mast or the Chrysler Building. Or to me, looks a lot like the leg of a He-Man action figure from the 80s ripped off and turned into a pen and sprinkled with My Little Pony magic dust. The end of the pen tapers from 4 rounded corners to a very subtle flat tip, where there is what appears to be a very small relief mark left from the injection molding process. The body of the cap is a single piece with the same inspired design as the body, which also tapers to the slightly flattened tip bearing the same small relief mark found on the end of the pen. The clip is held in place with an L bracket that inserts into the cutout in the body of the cap and is tension fixed as opposed to a rocker clip. The Conklin brand name is impressed and filled in with blue paint. The clip here differentiates itself from other clips bearing more squared edges versus those found on any other Conklin pen. The center band is a wedding band style center band with a slight step design just above a painted red line that runs around the center of the entire center band. The pen was packaged in our typical Conklin packaging with a blue sleeve as the outermost cover. On the edge of the sleeve is a barcode sticker that is actually important because this is the only indication of your nib size, since the nib, the the feed, or any other part of the pen does not indicate what nib size you have. This one is a fine. Slide off the sleeve, and you have your pretend leather clamshell box. Open that up, you'll find your warranty information and filling instructions. The pen sits inside a soft cushion bedding that when lifted up reveals a secret compartment that holds a dime bag with a blue and black ink cartridge. The included converter is pre-installed in the pen. It is a push-in style converter and not a threaded converter such as those found in other Conklin models such as the Duragraphs, All-Americans, and Herringbones. That's all I have for the neutral zone. Moving on to the good, those elements about the pen that are good. People have asked me many times which I like better, the JoWo No. 6 steel nib or the Bock No. 6 steel nib. I find myself always in a quandary. Why? Because they are, to me, both pretty awesome. They're just different. The Bock nib here writes a fine line typical of a Eurofine nib. It is also very smooth with a slight pointed feel, but different than the feedback we find on a JoWo nib. It is on the wetter side, no doubt due to the amount of ink and the rate of ink provided by the feed's single ink channel. I love how there seems to be a good amount of spring to the nib despite being made of steel. I'm also finding that there is not much in the way of line variation. However, to its credit, it is more than that found on a standard JoWo steel nib. I know that there are a lot of people that don't like metal grip sections due to the slip factor rivaling that of a bar of prison soap. However, in the case of the Empire, I do find that the flare-up and step at the end of the grip does a good job of preventing my fingers from sliding onto the feed and nib. It would also seem that due to the magnetic collar, as well as a step in the nib unit housing, there is additional length between the fingers and the tip of the nib. So people that like to write with a higher grip will find this more comfortable than not. If you're a close gripper and like writing with your fingers as close as possible to the tip of the nib, I don't know what to tell you. You're kind of on your own. Oh good, I did know what to tell you. You can't have a conversation about the Super Mario Brothers and not talk about Sonic the Hedgehog. And in the same way, you can't talk about a Bock nib and not talk about a JoWo nib. So let's look at one of my favorite ebonite pens. This is the Goulet exclusive Conklin Classic, equipped with a Goulet No. 6 JoWo steel nib. I love this pen for many reasons, including the fact that the ebonite does not smell like the underwear of an aged and well-fed lactose-intolerant zombie that sweats a lot. But that's not all. I love the way this pen writes. I pretty much love how JoWo nibs write in general. It has a line width, ink flow, and performance comparable to the Empire. It is, however, a stiffer nib with a greater degree of feedback when writing. It's a totally different experience. Is it better? That's as hard as answering if John Lennon was better than Paul McCartney. They are both awesome. Same goes for the Bock and JoWo here. They are both awesome, just really contrasting styles and writing experiences. Now let's compare it with a nib that is neither JoWo or Bock. The Esterbrook Popeye fountain pen. Be advised, this is the old Esterbrook before Kenro acquired the brand. This pen has a nib that in design and aesthetic looks a lot like a JoWo nib with its scroll work, but does not write like a JoWo nib. It writes more like, I don't know, the sharp edge of a broken finger. Thankfully, the nib is a No. 6 nib, and is replaceable with other brand nibs. Being a fan of Popeye as a kid and an adult, I had to get this pen. Upon completion of the review of this pen, I will be replacing the nib with one of the extra Goulet nibs I have in case of an emergency just like this one. Typically, I hate the nib being a different brand than the pen brand, unless it was sold that way. It pokes my OCD lizard brain. However, seeing how the nib that came with the Popeye pen is unbranded, my weird personal logic finds this acceptable. Now, let's compare it to an actual Conklin nib. This is the Conklin Nozak. This pen is an Italian-made pen made of Italian-made and poured acrylic. It is beautiful to the point of being hypnotic. The look on my face every time I look at this pen is the same look that a teenager has the moment he first steps into a strip club and realizes where he is. But let's talk about the nib. Also a springy nib for a steel nib, it has the added quality of a touch of stubbiness. Not enough to call it a stub, but enough to see a quality in your writing that just makes you feel like you should be speaking with a British accent. It's eloquent, it's smooth, and doesn't have any sort of tooth or feedback. It will for sure appeal to people that like to feel like they are writing on a sheet of warm butter with a stick of warm butter. I really am impressed with the capping of the pen as well. The magnetic cap is by far one of the strongest I have ever had in magnetic cap pens. It is so strong that I have no fear in it ever dropping off or stay in a tight pocket where I had to pull the pen out with only the cap. I was even convinced that there was no magnet and it was just a tight snap cap. Flicking or whipping it won't unseat the cap either. It has to be removed because you want to. That's all I have for the good. Moving on to the bad. Let's talk coin. The MSRP of this pen is $185. With online retailers, you can get it for $148. Now that to me seems like a lot of cheddar for a pen I believe to be injection molded with a steel nib, especially when there are options out there in a similar price point that offer gold nibs such as the Pilot Custom 74 or the Platinum 3776, or even steel nib pens with amazing acrylic bodies like the Nozak mentioned before. We even have acrylic pens like the Durograph and the All-American with steel nibs at an even lower price point with the added benefit of the threaded converter. Now, this pen is described as per Yafa's press release as an acrylic resin. And being that Yafa is a brand that has made clear distinctions in the past with regard to acrylics, such as pens made in Italy with Italian acrylic described as Italian acrylic, and acrylics not made in Italy described as European grade, I hardly find it likely that their use of the term acrylic resin to be an oversight. I actually think that they are calling it exactly what it is, which would mean that it is made of methyl methacrylate, commonly referred to as acrylic resin. Methyl methacrylate is a transparent thermoplastic that is often used as a shatterproof glass alternative and injection molded. It shows less relief marks when removed from molds versus that of regular cheap injection molded plastics. It's as durable and resistant to scratching as turned acrylics. Scratches can also be buffed out if needed in the same way turned acrylics can. It also doesn't yellow over time like a cheap injection molded resin does. So it shares a lot of the benefits of what we know to be acrylic at a lower cost and injection moldable. Now, it is more costly than the regular standard cheap injection molded resin, but it is also still cheaper than a turned acrylic. So, due to the design of this pen, making this pen any other way other than injection molding would be impossible to make using actual acrylics, such as those found in turned acrylic pens, while at the same time get it to cost anything less than close to $1,000 due to the insane amount of hand carving and polishing that would be required. So, my guess is that Conklin had to injection mold for the sake of the design, but chose not to use the cheaper resin and went with the more costly acrylic resin, aka methyl methacrylate. I bet you I'm right. Now, if you feel that the price is too high, I've got good news for you. With coupon code PenBoyRoy18, you can score this pen at an additional 10% discount at Goulet pens. It also includes the free 90 milliliter bottle of Monteverde ink. That is a pretty savage deal considering Goulet pens are the only ones doing it. The fine folks at Goulet pens worked this out for me and my viewers. Why? Because you, me, we are all awesome savage fountain pen virus infected people on a road rage mission to infect others till the world population of fountain pen users is the world population. That's all I have for the bad. Moving on to the ugly. Those elements about the pen that should not be, but are. The only gripe I have is the lack of a threaded converter. I think that the threaded converter is a design that adds a tremendous amount of appeal to Conklin and Monteverde pens. In the case of this pen, at this price, leaving it out was a bit disappointing. Not the end of the world, nor a deal breaker, but worth mentioning. That's all I have for the ugly. It's high noon. Decision-making time. Should you or should you not pull the trigger on the Conklin Empire? There is nothing about this pen that qualifies as not good. The way it writes is excellent, the design is unique, and the build is solid from the way it feels in the hand, right down to the capping of the pen. The only thing that could stand in the way of this pen being a pull the trigger is the price, compounded with the fact that it's injection molded. But if the fact that it's injection molded doesn't bother you, or if I am right in the theory that the acrylic resin is the more costly methyl methacrylate making the cost more justifiable, or you like new designs or already have all the aforementioned gold nib pens or turned acrylic pen options, then no, you won't regret pulling the trigger on this pen. It's a fantastic writer. It's well made and has a unique design. So, if you're watching this and it's not yet December 31st, 2018, be sure to use coupon code PenBoyRoy18 at Goulet Pens to get an additional 10% off the $148 price, in addition to the free 90 milliliter bottle of Monteverde ink. If you're watching this and it's the year 2019, you missed it. That was my review on the Conklin Empire. I hope you found it helpful. Thanks again to Brian, Rachel, and Margaret at Goulet Pens for providing this pen for review, as well as working out a discount code for my viewers. Most of all, thank you guys for watching. Love you guys. Be well, be safe.